My name is Marcus Chatfield with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Today is March 22nd, 2022, and I am here with Mr. Robert Frank. Thank you so much for making time for this interview today. We are so excited to be doing this Oak Hammock Oral History project, and I believe, Will, you were Dean of UF College of Public Health and Health Professions. You were instrumental in the formation, the idea, and really helping to get this off the ground, the Oak Hammock community off the ground. So we're really excited to get to interview you today.
Great.
So if I could start with where you were born, where you grew up.
I was born in Paris, France. My dad was an Army officer, so we moved around the country. I didn't really grow up in one place. I grew up in lots of places. We lived in Massachusetts and Augusta, Georgia, California, Carmel, California, Tehran, Iran, and then White Sands Missile Range. And then my dad retired and we moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is just across the mountains from White Sands Missile Range, and I went to high school there. And so that's sort of where I grew up.
Nice. And then you went to University of Mexico.
Right. I got recruited to UNM as a swimmer. I was a swimmer in high school. So I got recruited to come to UNM to swim, and that's how I got there. My coach, John Meacham, was a big influence, and that's how I ended up at the University of New Mexico.
Oh. And what degrees did you earn at University of Mexico?
So I got an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I was in the honors program in the Department of Psychology as an undergraduate. So I was exposed to a lot of faculty through that, and they suggested that I apply to graduate school in psychology, which hadn't really been a road I had thought about. I did. I got into the PhD program by the skin of my teeth, even though I did well as an undergraduate, but I was very competitive. And so I stayed there and got a master's degree and my PhD degree. Really, in psychology, you go for a PhD degree. The master's, you just sort of get along the way.
And so right out of the university with your PhD, did you go right into work in clinical psychology?
No, in psychology, you have to do an internship. So I went to the University of Washington and did my internship in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And so after my internship, that's when your PhD is formally awarded in psychology. So I got my PhD in '79, and I took a job at the University of Missouri-Columbia in their medical school in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. I was the first psychologist they ever had in that department. And so I was there. I went through the ranks there from assistant professor to associate to full professor. And while I was there, I became aware of the Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellowship, which is in Washington, sponsored by the National Academy of Medicine, Institute of Medicine. And so what it does is it places you in either the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, or the administration to work on health policy. So I went and worked on health policy for a year with Senator Jeff Bingaman, who was from New Mexico. And then he invited me to come back, and my dean agreed. So I worked with him on and off till 1995 on health policy. And that's led me to the University of Florida when I got nominated to be dean there.
Wow, that's amazing. And so as Dean of Public Health, what were your responsibilities?
Well, when I went there, the college was called the College of Health Related Professions. So we went through a lot of changes while I was there. I also had a job in the Shands healthcare system as a vice president for rehabilitation and behavioral health. And in that role, they were trying to build a health system that served all of the different parts of Shands and the university. So I did that for 4 years, and then the health system really never took off. There was a lot of internal resistance to it in the School of Medicine. So in '99, I left that role, but that was what really led me to the Oak Hammock project because I was doing that Shands role. David Challender asked me to undertake the Oak Hammock representation for the Health Science Center and Shands Hospital too.
And so, did you say it was Mr. Chandler?
Yeah, Dr. David Chandler was the vice president for health affairs at University of Florida at that point.
Okay. And did he already at that point, and this was, what year was that when he asked you?
If I remember correctly, it was 1997, but it could have been 98. I'm not real sure what year it was, but I think it was 97.
Okay.
He asked me, and really John Lombardi was spearheading this whole thing. And before I was formally asked to represent the Health Science Center, John Lombardi had brought together people to talk about the idea. So it was really at the seminal point, it was Leslie Bram and myself and John Lombardi. And he pretty much charged us to find out about what CCRCs were and how they worked and how we might be involved in it. So Leslie and I, she representing the foundation and me representing pretty much the academic enterprise, we traveled around to a number of different CCRCs and interviewed administrators, staff, and tried to understand how CCRCs worked. And of course, we were interviewing different companies that ran CCRCs, and that's how we met the Praxis folks. And we interviewed other companies as well. But we then went back to President Lombardi and reported to him on the idea of a CCRC and that we thought the University of Florida could have a critical role in building a CCRC. And the premise was that the CCRC would introduce us to alumni who would become integrated again into the University of Florida network, the learning system that you talked about a second ago, and that might encourage them to make bigger donations or make donations to the University of Florida if they'd never done so. So that's why the foundation and the academic enterprise were partnered in this to begin with. And as we went through the process, we discovered that the foundation was really a critical tool to raise the startup money, if you will, to examine how we could actually build a CCRC and to do the first series of steps that were required. And Leslie was successful in identifying a donor, Frank Duckworth, who gave us a generous donation. I want to say it was $200,000, but you'd have to ask Leslie for sure. Maybe it was $300,000 that really got us going and did all the startup work we needed to do.
And the startup work, that was focus groups around the state or around the country?
Well, it was focus groups around, it sort of went a step beyond what we had already done. It really examined how would the university do this? How would we raise the money? We recognized immediately that this was a huge financial enterprise. And to get it going, you somehow had to sort of start the wheel spinning. And that's what the money that Frank Duckworth was going to do gave us to do the legal work that we needed to identify how the university would partner with the CCRC and what the role of each entity would be. And, we were very interested in protecting the liability of the university if the CCRC failed. And so in those first steps, were really about how do you make it a successful continuous care retirement community because of all the liability you face when you go into a real continuous care liability community that guaranteed health benefits to the residents, and that really increased the potential liability both to the university and to the CCRC. So we spent a lot of time working through that issue, and Praxis introduced us to a number of different business entities that could help us understand to define the relationship between the university and the CCRC.
Yeah. And was there a model to follow? Were there other CCRCs that were affiliated with universities?
There were a couple that had very loose relationships. The University of Virginia had a model, and Leslie and I, and probably some other people, but I don't recall who, went and we did a visit there. A couple of other universities were toying with the idea. I suspect that Leslie could give you a more accurate history of who the other entities were. My memory is not that sharp about it at this point, to be honest. But I remember Virginia, but nobody had the kind of relationship that we were anticipating. Virginia's relationship was pretty loose, and we were anticipating, and President Lombardi was anticipating a much more integrated relationship where the university offered this rich learning environment, and we created what he called, he had a language for it he used all the time. The CCRC would be an A model, but not an A plus. So we were going to be a very high quality enterprise, but we weren't going to be the Ritz or, the very most expensive exclusive one. We wanted high quality, for lack of a better term, probably high quality, affordable membership in the CCRC. And that's what John constantly preached to us. And I hope you have John as one of the participants in the oral history, because, it was his energy, his vision that really drove this whole enterprise.
Yes, we have him on the list
Good.
to interview. Yes.
Well, you'll find out he's quite charismatic.
So from the beginning, the idea of continuous learning as a central feature of Oak Hammock, that was there from the beginning, it sounds like.
Yes, so continuous learning, but we also envisioned that my role in the Health Science Center would be integrated by having nursing on site, our College of Nursing, and Kathy Long, who I imagine is one of your participants. She should be.
Yep.
She came on the board after I left, but Kathy was going to, ensure that the nursing had a role. Probably we envisioned with a nurse practitioner, advanced practice nurse, and then my college would have a role through PTs and OTs. We weren't public health at that point. We were still health. We were health professions, we called ourselves by that point. We had evolved to that. But so PT, OT, psychology, all of our disciplines would have a role. We envisioned at the beginning medicine would have a role through geriatricians and family medicine. And we envisioned that they would be fully integrated when we first started. And as you've probably seen, that vision was not as fulfilled as we imagined it would be. Not as fulfilled as the learning part has been, I think.
Well, actually, I didn't know that.
Oh.
So originally, in what ways was the vision not as fulfilled?
Well, we envisioned that all the primary care for residents in medicine and in dentistry, and the dean of vet med, Joe DiPietro, I don't know if he's on your list, but he was a very active champion of the role of animals in aging communities. And so all of these deans were proposing that they would have some presence in the CCRC in the first years when we were envisioning all this. When the rubber hit the road, it became more difficult to fulfill that vision, basically because of the money issue. And as we got farther into it, there wasn't as much fungible dollars as we thought there might be to begin with to provide funding for those kinds of services. Still, when we first opened it, dentistry had a presence there, medicine had a presence, the nursing had a presence. PT originally had a presence. I'm not sure how that has gone over the years, but it was still there when I left in 2007.
And PT, you mean physical therapy?
Physical therapy, yeah, excuse me. OT was proposed to be there too. That didn't work out quite as well as I recall.
And that's occupational therapy?
Occupational therapy, I'm sorry.
Well, this is so interesting. I didn't realize that the original vision was to be even more integrated with the health sciences departments and colleges.
Well, that was part of John's vision. I appreciated it. It was part of John's vision. And it stayed our vision until we got into the late financing challenges. And I'm sure if you've talked to any of the Praxis people, you've learned that, raising the amount of money we had to raise was not a simple task. And we really had to work hard to raise the money and demonstrate that we could meet that criteria of a viable CCRC that the state required.
Yeah, I did hear that, and it was complicated too with after 9/11. It sounds like the financing situation shifted and made it more challenging too.
Yeah.
So with that in mind about the original vision being even more integrated, what was the science behind this? When you went and traveled and visited other CCRCs, what looked so appealing in this? Why was this such a good idea?
Well, part of it was a good idea because we thought we were going to be first to really show how universities could create dynamic aging communities that were fully appreciative of the wealth of a university. And, to be honest, that was John Lombardi's vision. And all of the deans that I worked with were hired under John Lombardi's reign or time as president. The foundation he was very active in the foundation, and they were tied into his vision as well. So we were all enchanted and encouraged by this idea that we were going to pioneer or create a new model of CCRCs, not really new, but a more integrated, totally functioning model. And that's what drove us in those first years from like 97 till, I can't remember, maybe 2000, when we were really trying to put the thing together.
Yeah. And so when you started hearing feedback from alumni about their interests and you were gauging how viable this was, what were some of your impressions? What was some of the response that you got?
Well, once we were able to hire some people with Frank Duckworth's money, we started, trying to, what you have to do is get people to put down $1,000 to commit to say that they're a committed person to move into the CCRC. And so we created a little office, and I'm sure you've heard about that. And Star was critical. Star Bradbury was, the star literally of that. She was very dynamic and told the story extremely well. And that was pivotal to our success, I believe. But she would, we put out feelers and advertised and in every venue we could think of that people that were of that age might be interested. And we started getting responses. And what I found surprising, and perhaps others did as well, is that it wasn't just UF alumni. We were getting responses from outside Florida. And our initial idea was that this was going to be a Florida uh, idea, and that we would attract Florida alumni or maybe UF alumni that had moved away. But we attracted a number of people who had no UF connection. They just simply were interested in this, if you will, retiring in a community that offered the richness that we thought Oak Hammock would provide. And so it sort of started out with a vision that we then put out there, and people were interested in it, not just UF people.
Yeah. And the richness, that was the whole package of the ILR, the idea of continuing care, the idea of this vibrant community.
Yeah, and when we first started in those first years, we thought the site would be a little closer to UF, and we really struggled when we started doing site selection. I'm sure you've heard about this from others that were involved, because as we looked at sites, we didn't really find one close to UF that was big enough and allowed the possibility of expansion, which in our initial vision is we thought we would be doing an expansion by 2 or 3 years after we opened up. And as you know, that expansion never really happened, and now they're reconsidering it again, and they should. But the finance model, 9/11, all the things that happened to the CCRC financing just dried up so dramatically, the expansion really didn't become viable. But at any rate, we needed a big site, and there weren't any, but we still, the vision was still so positive about the integration that's what really people were taken by.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the integration, what I'm imagining is you mean things like students getting actual experience at Oak Hammock. Is that the kind of thing you mean?
I should mention that students were a vital part of what we were trying to make happen. Students and faculty, but really a lot of people were enchanted or taken by the idea that there'd be these young, engaging, vibrant people around, and it wouldn't just be a community of really aged people. They wanted the diversity, if you will, of more like a normal community would be. And often, as people age, they get isolated from a lot of young people. Just their families are around, but everybody likes to have the diversity that comes with the energy of youth.
Yeah. Yeah. So in addition to, so when you say integration and that original vision of being more integrated, is there anything else besides having students there?
Well, we envisioned sort of 3 components. One would be the faculty would be there and provide health services from the Health Science Center. Second, there would be a very integrated connection to the Shands Hospital. So if people needed more tertiary care, they could easily get to Shands, and they wouldn't come in as strangers, so to speak. So that's one part. Second, we would have the students and other faculty there for the learning community, and also as learners in the clinics that the faculty would provide. And we also envisioned initially that faculty from other students and faculty from other colleges, journalism was interested in being there and doing a newsletter and having journalism students help do that. The College of the Arts imagined that they would do presentations there with their different, they had a huge number of disciplines in that college that could do presentations, musicals, all types of different things within the arts. And so that would be there. And then the third wing would be that Oak Hammock residents would be able to come as auditors to classes at the University of Florida. So if you wanted to learn anthropology or a language or something that wasn't in your original curriculum, you might have a chance to go and do that. So those were sort of the components that we originally imagined. And some of all of those happened. Some happened better than others, as you've seen, as you've talked to people.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting to hear the original vision. I mean, what in these interviews that we've been doing, the overwhelming story is just how successful it is. So to hear that the original vision was a little different, that's really interesting.
Well, it's been successful, but everything has a life of its own. And imagination and reality connect, but not in the way you always think it will. So, I think it is hugely successful, but not all the things we imagined came to success in the same way we thought they would.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, when you think of the success of Oak Hammock and how things came together for it to happen, even if it was different from the original vision, what do you think, what are the key elements that came together to enable Oak Hammock to happen? Because it's rare.
No, I agree. It's very rare. Well, I think this planning committee that President Lombardi put together, and he was actually steering it, he had a hands-on approach to this until he left. But it still had a lot of momentum when he left. But his initial winding it up, pushing it, getting it going, we started in 97, I think, Leslie and I, and then, we didn't open Oak Hammock, as I recall. I can't remember the exact year, whether it was 2003 or 2005, but it was a long way down the road from when we started, and 1,000 meetings and 1,000 hours of conversations. And at times it was just overwhelmingly long. But we did get there. And so as we went along, I think John's vision of the University of Florida, Oak Hammock at the University of Florida, which he pushed very hard. And there were times where in the early planning where we thought we couldn't do Oak Hammock at the University of Florida. We thought we were just going to have to do Oak Hammock because of the liability and the financial issues. But John just kept hammering, and so we worked really hard to make that happen. And I think that if there's one factor that's driven the success of Oak Hammock, I would say it's that key connectivity and proximity and the charisma of the University of Florida. Let's face it, the University of Florida is a powerhouse university. When we first started in the 90s, John's vision was drive it, drive it, drive it. But, where it is today is extraordinary. But people sensed that when they came there, the energy of the place, the power, the research that was going on there. The faculty are very dynamic. The students are extraordinary. All of that sells the place. And so I think a lot of that made it happen. And as you know, a lot of the original inhabitants are people that were faculty at the University of Florida, or, like E.T. York, who was oversaw the entire University of Florida system, the whole Florida system of universities. So we attracted really high caliber residents, if you will, in terms of life success.
Yeah. You mentioned thousands of hours of meetings, and sometimes it feeling overwhelming or impossible. What were some of the biggest challenges in those meetings when it bogged down?
Oh my God. I mean, the challenges, for me personally, my challenges are probably different than other people, but the conversations around things like, we probably spent 200 hours talking about animals and whether you could have animals there. And some people, my great dear friend Leslie Bram, who was not an animal fan, wanted no animals. And then she allowed we might be able to have dogs if they were under 40 pounds. And so we had a running joke every time she came over to my house for dinner. I would point to my dog and say, my dog weighs 80 pounds. You want me to cut her in half? so that only half of her can come to Oak Hammock, this beautiful Labrador retriever. And so, that conversation went on forever until the animal lovers, with the help of Dean DiPietro, won, and we finally got an approval to have animals there. We had the same conversation over guns. All the university people were pretty liberal and not gun fans. And then there were a lot of people that were real people that lived and had guns and said, "You're not going to let me take my gun. I've had a gun since I was, 7 years old or something." Maybe not 7, but 15 or whatever rational age is to own a gun. And then we went on to conversations about what color the furniture, how we would decorate it, and how big each room would be. And the decoration conversations were the ones that almost drove me psychotic. I just didn't have a lot of tolerance for it. My idea was, we have an interior designer who's extraordinary. She's done other CCRCs. Why are we debating what she's recommending? But the rest of them, debated it for hours. And, our committee had a lot of retired people, and this was a really big part of their lives. I had another life that called me a lot. And so some of those meetings were overwhelming to me in terms of just how much time we spent on issues that to me were pretty clear cut. Yeah. So, there were a lot of complex, smart people in these rooms who had really strong opinions. So it was difficult at times.
Yeah. Well, when you look back on those years of that coming together and pushing it forward, and what are some of your favorite memories of that process?
Well, one of my favorite memories, of course, is the opening. That day that we actually opened Oak Hammock, which was extraordinary. Another great memory is when we identified the Oak Hammock site, and we actually went and walked it before any of the trees were cleared, or it was just still basically wilderness. Great Florida wilderness is just an incredibly beautiful site. And the beauty of that site was charismatic in my view, and really captured me. And I think it captured everybody. And if you go to Oak Hammock today, it is just a beautiful, beautiful place. So it really moves me still today to talk about it. So those were two things that were really important. The other memories, of course, were the collegiality, the people I worked with on that committee that really brought a lot to it. My predecessor in health-related professions, Dick Gudikins, was on that committee. He was one of the founding residents, moved in the first cohort of people, he and his wife, Anna. But Dick was on the committee, and it was just, aside from the tedious conversations about decor, they were extraordinary people to spend time with. And so the rapport of the group was really important, and that's an important memory to me. But, I just think the integration of the facility as it came together, and the fact that we actually brought it to fruition, that we raised that money, that we were able to refinance it, that we were able to, get through the challenges that 9/11 made. I stayed on that organizing committee, which became the governing committee from 97 until 2007 when I left. So 10 years. So it was a big part of my life during that whole time. And the people that I worked with, the first people we hired at Oak Hammock, were really impressive, I thought. The relationship with Praxis soured over time, but during the time that we were raising money and actually building it, the relationship was quite positive, and I enjoyed working with those folks. And it soured really after I left in 2007. So I've heard, some of the elements that went into it, and they're very reasonable, different points of view on how you proceed on running a place like that. But I wasn't part of any of that discussion, so it was all pretty positive when I was there. And raising the funding, going to the banks and in Scotland and places I had never even thought about raising money was all educational to me. And the financing people were particularly sharp and really great to work with.
Yeah.
So I guess those were some of my best memories of it. It was a proud accomplishment to be part of that. And I still look back on it positively. When I became president at the University of New Mexico, we toyed with the CCRC. Unfortunately, I had a board of regents that was less than visionary and very different than the situation at Florida, where John could go to the board and they believed what he said to them. My regents weren't nearly that visionary, so we never got it off the ground, but I would have loved to have replicated it here in New Mexico. We had all the same ingredients that Florida had, except for a visionary board. So we could have done it here, but it just didn't prove feasible. We actually brought Leslie Bram and a couple other people from the founding group in to consult with us on it and had good ideas, and we had a basic plan, but our regents just wouldn't go for it.
And was it a liability or a fear of liability, like you mentioned at first at UF?
It was partially that, partially there. I came to New Mexico with the vision that I think I learned a lot from John Lombardi, even though I wasn't that close to him, that universities serve communities and communities should serve universities. And so our regents didn't have that vision. They had a much more narrow vision of the university. And even though I was able to successfully create some parts of that vision here, especially in entrepreneurial areas, I wasn't able to pull. I mean, I got them to take some big risks. We built an innovation district that took $7 million of risk from them, which is actually a lot bigger than UF ever made on the CCRC. But I couldn't sell the CCRC idea. I sold the entrepreneur idea and got him to take that. And we were very successful there. And we built a community around that, but couldn't get the Oak Hammock CCRC vision across to them. So, it just takes right time, right place, right energy. And Florida had all of those things. I guess I should say right time, right place, right vision and energy. And we had all of those things. And we had right time, right place, right vision, not right energy at New Mexico. So it just didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, when you say with Dr. Lombardi's vision of what a university should be and the regents being on board with that, it's almost like the meaning of a university as a bigger system almost.
Absolutely. That's what Oak Hammock encompasses. And that's what I think John believed. That was my vision of what he believed, my interpretation, not my vision. And I think that was what Leslie's interpretation was. And our foundation, Paul Robel, who ran our foundation, I think he certainly was supportive of that. And, he empowered Leslie to take a very important function role that took an enormous amount of her time. And, as you've probably heard from her personally, she knew about aging communities from growing up. So she came prepared in a way that certainly none of the rest of us were. And that added a lot to it too. So, she was a real driving force behind this, both in terms of her acceptance and appreciation of aging communities and her financial knowledge and her ability to raise money that really got us going when we needed it. Because that first dip of money was really, at first we didn't see a way to find it, to get it, to make it happen. And then she kind of magically got with Frank Duckworth, who believed in CCRCs. And unfortunately, passed away during the building process. And he made a commitment and made a significant financial contribution.
Yeah, I understand that was really a big key, was having that initial funding for the initial research,
Exactly.
essentially marketing
Because
research.
we were a little bit dead in the water until she dug up Frank Duckworth. I would say at that point, if you had asked me the odds of us succeeding, I would have said they were 70 against 30 of likelihood of success. So I think we were up against it at that moment.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's so easy for me to just see the success and just to see that it was just always meant to be. It's hard to remember that those challenges looked like that.
Yeah,
at
when
that
you
time.
when you go there and drive into this beautiful place and see the living, the villas, the apartments, the different styles of apartments, the villa. I mean, we had enormous hours of conversation about that mixture and whether there should be villas and how big they should be and how much freedom we should give residents to change the villas or the apartments. I mean, all those things were thousands of hours of conversation just by themselves. And now you drive into this place and you see these beautiful homes and you go talk to the people that live there. In fact, David Challender, who was my boss at the time I got asked to participate, lives in one of those villas today. And so look at how it's played out. It's just hard to imagine the complexities and the obstacles we faced during the actual consideration and then the actual building issues and the money issues.
Yeah. So the opening day, I have not actually heard about the opening day. That was a celebration of all of those thousands of hours and years of work. Could you tell me a little bit about what?
Well, let me see what I can remember about it. It was a long time ago, and I don't have a great memory for these kinds of things. I have sort of, a memory, this happened and it was important and this occurred, but I don't remember details as well as somebody like Leslie Braham, who can probably tell you lock, stock, and barrel everything that happened that day. But all of us were there. The president was there. It wasn't John Lombardi anymore, unfortunately. The president was there, and of course, Vice President for Health Affairs was there. It wasn't David Challender any longer, but Leslie was there, and I was there, and almost all the Health Science Center deans that had been involved in the conversations at times, even though they weren't on the committee, they participated actively. So Joe DiPietro, veterinary medicine, was there. Terry Dolan was there because Frank Catalanato, the original dean, was gone by then. Bill Riffey from pharmacy was there, and Ken Burns, who is now the dean of medicine and the vice president of health affairs, was there. But he wasn't the dean of medicine when we started. So there had been some transition among those deans, but about four of us, I forgot to mention Kathy, who was really active, and Kathy Long, who was really active in the conversation. She was there. So we were all there and celebrating. Of course, the Praxis people were there, and their whole team was there. And it was a moment of profound enjoyment. And when we cut the ribbon, all of us were thrilled to have it happen. And residents were moving in. A lot of them were people that hadn't been there at the start, saying we're going to move in. There were people that had come later in the process and didn't even know a lot of that history, but they were pioneers at moving in and were pleased to move there. But to them, it was exactly like you said. You drive in and see the beautiful landscaping and the building, and everything's already there. So they were appreciative, but not realizing that it had been like going along the Oregon Trail with lots of challenges and potential lethal moments. So that's how I remember it. I can't remember a lot of the other details. We did a tour and walked through it all. And for me personally, I remember one of the contentious moments was when we built it about the PT area and the recreation areas, about the swimming pool. This was another standing joke between Leslie and myself. They wanted to have a swimming pool that would be therapeutic and also for recreation. And, I swam in college for 4 years, and I said, therapeutic pools and recreation pools don't match. One's 83 or 87 degrees, and the other's, probably 78 degrees or 75 degrees optimally, and you can't swim recreationally in an 83-degree pool. You can dip in it, maybe do, exercise. But we had a long conversation. At the end of the day, we ended up with 2 swimming pools, one which was recreational, and Leslie dubbed it the Bob Frank pool. And so did many of the other people on our committee, because it was a real fight to make this happen. And so, of course, the 2 pools were there. And I stayed in the recreational pool for a long moment, as I recall. And so, there were moments like that where you went through and said, well, gee, we've got this PT area that didn't really get conceived originally, that in the conversations, I advocated for, and other people, of course, but it was sort of my champion area because I was the dean of that college. And, so you went to the places that may have mattered more in the conversations to you. And so that's how I went through the opening day. And I think all of us did the same thing. Some people like Leslie were really involved in every detail. I sort of waxed in and out, depending on my tolerance for the tediousness of the conversation, to be honest. So I went to the places that I remembered being really critical to me. So that was my memory of the opening day. Yeah. But a very happy day, a very pleasant day.
Yeah. So you mentioned developing the innovation district in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder, are there other projects or lessons you learned from this Oak Hammock experience that, informed other projects you did after that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Oak Hammock was a big part of my deanship. So I was a dean from 95 to 2007 there. And it was a very seminal part of my understanding of what it's like to be an administrator in a university. So, prior to coming to Florida, I'd never raised money. I'd done a little bit of it, but all my money raising was writing grants and going to, grant giving foundations like Robert Wood Johnson or NIH or those kinds of things. But I'd never been part of a foundation like the University of Florida had, especially one that was a machine. Missouri had a very undeveloped foundation when I left. So Oak Hammock, where we started to do all those things, were, one, we engaged the entire university community in a project. 2, we used the foundation as a lever to make something happen and raise money through it, and learned how different parts of the university operated to make that function. The call to arms that John Lombardi had about bringing all the academic entities to the table. I mean, all of those were really important learning lessons for me. So I was a dean for those years, and I left Florida to be a provost, and I was a provost for 5 years at Kent State. And when I went to Kent State, the thing I realized immediately was that there was a university and a community, and they had no relationship. So in my provost role, I started advocating that, in fact, at Kent State, as you might know from the history, Kent State was very active in the 1960s in anti-war protests. And it turned out that people died there during that process. So the community really resented the university for what the killings brought to that area, and how it made the town of Kent have to take on a cloak that it did not believe it deserved. So there was a huge town gown split there, enormous town gown split. and it was around the shootings in May of 1974. It was around no unification thereafter. There had never been an effort to heal the wounds that were created that day. And there were people at Kent State that were active in the protests that day that were on the faculty, and they had enormously strong feelings, and the community had equally strong feelings of embarrassment, regret, dislike, wanting to not identify with the university, of course, which has the name. So when I went there, I realized that one of the things that had to happen is that there had to be healing and advocacy around those areas. And so when I spoke in my early days, that's what I talked about. And a lot of it caught on. My president caught on to that, and he started pushing it. And we ended up having we had a healing episode around the 40th anniversary of the Kent State protests and killings. We brought together all the people that had been wounded that day for the first time. They'd never met as a group since the day it happened, and they weren't really tied together in any way. Some were just walking across campus and some were protesting, but we brought them together. We brought the relatives of the people that died together. So all of that, and the fact that we changed the entire blueprint of the community, of the university, to reach into the community like we did with Oak Hammock. So I learned a lot that I probably didn't appreciate and couldn't tell you. But if you go to Kent State today, you see a community that has merged with the university. So that happened, I think, because of what I learned at UF. And then when I came to New Mexico as president, of course, that same thinking was in the back of my mind all the time. And that's what led us. The first thing I realized, having grown up in New Mexico and having left, was that the university graduated students, but we didn't have jobs for them in New Mexico. The economy in New Mexico is very undeveloped. And so I realized the university had to take a role in the economic development of our state and our community. And I think that was part of what John preached in a different way, and I believed it. And so we did that, and we built this innovation district that I partnered with the mayor of Albuquerque, R.J. Berry, and he bought into what I believed 100%, and we built this town gown sponsored innovation district, and he got the city to build around it, and we got the university to build a 5-story building there. So Oak Hammock was just so critical to my personal development and my thinking of being a leader at a university. So yeah, it's had huge influence on me. I didn't realize it all until you started asking me about it. Very moving when I think about it. Yeah.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, thank you for making me realize it.
Let's see. I'm not really sure what to ask after that. I'm moved by imagining such profound changes coming from your experience at Oak Hammock, especially, Kent State and at New Mexico. And again, I'm thinking the systems thinking,
Right.
and that vision of integration with the university is really powerful.
Well, I mean, I would say one other thing that's important that came out of Oak Hammock is all these people that were founders and thinkers. If you go to Oak Hammock today, you'll see that plaque on the wall, the little tiny plaque that has all our names on it. But by and large, we don't shine brightly in Oak Hammock today. It was a community that came together to build Oak Hammock. And it's the community that runs Oak Hammock today. And that that thinking is really an important part of what happened there. So while I take personal pride in what I participated in, and I'm sure everybody else does, Leslie does, and you'll see John did, and all the other people, some of whom we don't have anymore, Dick Gudikins. You don't walk into Oak Hammock and say John Lombardi built Oak Hammock. You don't see Leslie Brand built Oak Hammock. You don't hear Bob Frank's name. It's only people that have a historic memory that bring that up. But at any rate, this community ideal that was created there is really powerful, and that's a big part of what's rolled on and still is there today, and makes it work, I think. And I hear, I've talked to Ed Popple, who came on the committee when I left and stayed on it like I did forever, and went through all the transition pains of leaving Praxis and all the challenges they had. But I've talked to him a lot. He's a very close friend of mine. We used to ride together, and he's told me the story of what's happened since. But that whole idea of the community and the integration between the people that live there, the university, and to some degree the town of Gainesville, that value still is there from what I hear, and I think that's important. It's important to the success of the enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that you wish was different about Oak Hammock?
Well, I wish we'd been a little more successful with the integration of the Health Science Center into the actual place. I mean, it's there, but it's not as powerful as we originally envisioned. So I think that's the one thing that didn't happen as much as we hoped it would. And I think while Oak Hammock is hugely successful, I think it would have been a nice addition to it. I think it would have enhanced some of, more students there, and a bigger, a little more vibrant community for the residents, even though the community's got no limitations right now.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you'd like to speak about that we haven't touched on?
No, you've been very thorough. You brought up things I would have never thought to talk about. So I appreciate your interviewing skills, and it's been very, very thoughtful and gratifying to talk to you. So I appreciate the opportunity to go back and reminisce over a great period.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recorder off.
Yeah.